Good morning again. So a few weeks ago, Reverend Beth told me that she'd be gone this Sunday, and she asked if I'd speak. And, of course, then the process begins, right? What's the talk title? What's the substance? And I was like, where's the talk title? And the last time I was here, driving back to Sunday, I kept hearing this saying, become the leader you've been seeking. Become the leader you've been seeking. And I'm like, well, I didn't initially see that how fit with the monthly theme of empowerment that we're doing, but my God does it. You know, and to find this talk, I quite often will start with the concept, and then I go within to find out how do we connect that with our personal power? What does that look like? So I started wondering, what is it? What does it take to become the leader we've been seeking? And as I was pondering that, I started thinking about some of the dissidents of history. We have Martin Luther King in the 60s. I was a little young. I kind of saw it on the news, but I wasn't old enough to kind of really be a part of all that. And what did he do? What was it about Martin Luther King that allowed him to stand in such a truth of human nature, of spiritual nature, to cause a fundamental shift in this country? What was it about him? What was it? Did he go out excuse me. Did he go out and form a committee to be against oppression? Did he do anything to be against the government? No. What Martin Luther King did was somehow he knew the truth about the spiritual nature of all humans, and he stood in that truth. He wasn't against something, he was for the truth. And in that, when he was for that truth, he stood strong in that knowing, and it's like he created a new energetic opening for the greater truth to come onto this planet through his being. This truth was not happening. He was the coalescing force. So standing in that truth, he initiated the law of attraction to bring other people to support him in this endeavor. Now I'm reminded that they say that Mother Teresa always said, don't invite me to an anti-war protest. I won't be there. If you invite me to a pro-peace gathering, I'm there. Now, why is that? What's the difference? The pushing against. You know, we know from what Miles was reading and our principles, when we push against something, we give that something force to push back. So these leaders knew that they were standing in their truth, and Martin Luther King took what Gandhi had developed when Gandhi was helping first in South Africa, then India, and he developed the nonviolent protest. And that's what Martin Luther King espoused. He didn't want the violence because that would push against. He wanted the nonviolent approach, stand in our truth. And then if we look even at, I remember living in Evergreen, Colorado, which is the most beautiful postcard picture place I've ever been besides the Matterhorn in Switzerland. Just beautiful. So it's about 1,000 feet above Denver up in the mountains. I was living there, and I remember in about 1989, I think it was Tiananmen Square happened in China. And so all the student dissidents stood around, and the world was watching on TV, and I was watching this, and it was like this movement. The China government was about to change. And then all of a sudden, they came in and cracked down on it, and they shut it down. But you remember one of the lasting images of that was that guy holding a bag, standing in front of a tank. And the tank tried to go around him, and he moved. The tank tried to go around him, and he moved. Where does that strength come from? Where does that such truth come from that it actually changes governments? Because even though they cracked down in Tiananmen Square, I'm sure that had an effect on the consciousness that's still unfolding to this day. In fact, in the news over a month ago, our Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was in China, and remember that blind dissident wanted to immigrate for asylum, and there was all this kerfuffle, but he ended up getting here. So there's these people that have this sense of what's right. This isn't a sense of right versus wrong in a mental way. This is a sense of truth. You know, humans can get caught up in the right versus wrong. Oh, I'm right. One of the biggest things that we have to kind of get over is needing to be right. And we can stand in that, but it's most important if we go deeper. That's up here. If we go deeper into our soul, into our presence, then we stand in the truth. Now let's put the dissidents, I'm going to bring them back in a minute, but I want to bring up a point. Bring up a point that, I've been studying and apprenticing and learning stuff since took the Silva method when I lived in Malaysia, or I lived in Indonesia. I took the class in Malaysia in 1982, and it just launched this desire to search and find things. So it was probably more than 10 years ago. I had finished with one of the systems that I had learned and apprenticed in, and I was like, okay, I think I've gotten what I can from them. I need to move on. So I was talking to a very close friend at the time, and I said, I just wonder who's going to be my next teacher. And Elizabeth said, don't you think it's time you become your own teacher? And it was a new thought to me, because I had at that time, give me a workshop, I was there. Give me a class, I was there. I was a seeker. It was time to find. Move from seeking to finding. And so when she said that, I started thinking about it. And it wasn't that, you don't take other classes and you keep learning, but that the motivation changed. I didn't need another teacher to kind of be my lifeguard to show me the way. Although other teachers have shown up, it's in a different format now. So in doing that, in becoming the teacher, what did I have to do? I had at that time at least 15 years of classes and materials. I thought, maybe it's time to really apply them. Right? Which is the part that's so challenging for people at times. We go to these classes like the visioning class this afternoon or whatever class it is, and we learn these different methods and these different tools, and then we go home and we have our normal life. It really takes us looking to find a way to stand in our truth, in the universal truth of who we are, in order to start being the person we've been reading about in the books, so that we can start making a difference, because we're all here to make a difference of some format. So we're talking about true nature, and what I want to do is I want to do a little exercise. We're going to do an exercise here, and then at the end of the talk, we're going to do a little piece to bring it together. And what we're going to do is we're going to look and establish a baseline of what your identity is. Who do you see yourself as in different parts of life? Now, when we do this, it's very simple. I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes, and just whatever answer comes to you, don't correct it. Don't come up with the right answer that would be, a teacher would agree with. Come up with authentically who you are in different relations in life, because it's so important. If we're going to make a change, it's very important to know where we are. If we don't know where we are and we're not truthful with ourselves, then any change is not going to have its greatest effect. So I invite you to just be comfortable and allow your eyes to close. Take that deep breath in and move into your inner self. Move into your inner self reality. Again, don't correct the impressions you get. Accept them as where you are authentically. Who do I actually feel I am at my very core? Meaning, who am I in relationship to health? What do I believe about health? Who am I in relationship to being healthy? Who am I in relationship to my career? Do I go to work simply for the paycheck? Or is there something more? Who am I when it comes to being of service, to doing my career? Who am I when it comes to my material possessions? Who am I when it comes to the concept of abundance? How is that flowing in my life? And who am I in relationship to love? Whatever brief answer you receive, that's fine. You can open your eyes. That's your starting point. This is just to kind of understand where we're starting. And now let's look at who we actually are. So you've heard from many teachers that have said we're not human beings having spiritual experiences, but we're actually at our core spiritual beings having human experiences. Okay, that's a really good saying, but once again, how have you integrated it? How would you integrate being that spiritual being, that presence on this planet known as your name? What does that look like? Because what we have to realize in the personal growth arena is there's phases of evolution. You know, when we first hear these concepts, we say, oh, I can do that. So there's the I can. And then comes the commitment, and we say I will do that. And then we evolve into it with practice, and then we start saying, ooh, I know that. But then we move into, after enough practice and enough self-awareness, we move into that place of I am this. So it's a big difference. The I can is up in the mind. The I will starts moving into the body. And then by the time we're at the I am, we're standing in our truth. So when it comes to that saying, we are spiritual beings having human experiences, if you were to actually believe that and act from that, how would you see that? How could you be that spiritual being having human experiences when you're paying your bills? How would it be for you to be that spiritual being having a human experience when you walk into work? Recognizing that every other person around you is a spiritual being having human experiences. What does that do to those petty conflicts that happen? What does that do when we want to reach out and judge others and blame them for something we don't want to look at in the mirror in ourselves? Which is always the case. If you believed, when we believe that we're spiritual beings having human experiences, what would it be like when you're driving on 410 and a driver cuts you off? How does the spiritual being react versus the human being? Okay? No hand signals involved in the spiritual being. It's just standing in the truth. Okay, they're a spiritual being having a human experience, and that's what they needed to have. Thank God I'm still safe. Bless you. In the movie Friday Night, Louise Hay said when she's driving, she sends love to every single driver on the road. It was a great movie, by the way. And especially, what would it mean if you saw yourself as a spiritual being having a human experience when it comes to those parts of life that we still claim we have problems or issues? The problems or issues exist in someone who's stuck in the human condition. But when we can move into that place of integrating, I am that power and presence having human experiences, then what do problems or issues look like when we have God on our side? They're that small. And they only exist that small because we still have the mind holding on to them. Seems to be the way it works. So let's look at one of the definitions from page 114 on Living the Science of Mind. I actually copied it here. So this is called the silent one within us. We find this saying in the Upanishad, the silent one, the knower, ever resting in us, may walk, stand, sit, lie down, and not do anything at his sweet will. What is that statement saying about the absoluteness of the Supreme as the all-conquering power of the Spirit? And this all-conquering power of the Spirit finds self-expression through man. This Supreme Being is at the center of each one of us. To it we may come for guidance, and from it we may draw both inspiration and the power to live, stand, walk, or sit, and everything else in life. Every act is an outcome of consciousness. Every movement is within the divine being, and since the divine being is everywhere, it must also be at the center of our own life. Like in something you said reading up here, that God is at the center waiting for us to access it. That's why we have to meditate, because the humdrum of the normal world and the normal thinking drowns out the still small voice of God that is within us. So it's a requirement really to adjust that brain mode to be able to hear the still small voice. Otherwise, we stay in the humdrum of the human condition, and we're not living that spiritual being having human experiences. It is not only at the center of our own life, it is that center. Hence, to think of it as the very essence of our own being is clear thinking. To know that its being is our being is right knowing. And to declare that its life is our life is to permit its power to flow through us. That is what we want to be. We connect to that center, that God center. That's when we can live as the spiritual being, having a lot of human experiences which don't always have to be difficult. You know, I can see what I'm talking about in my own life at this point, you know, and you can see certain areas of life where we just held on to them as issues. We've held on to them as difficult. And that's because we've identified ourselves in that area of life as a human first, with an occasional spiritual breakthrough. Everybody has these areas. I know I'm relating big time to this talk. And so it's interesting to, how do we integrate that? How do we integrate that? So let's go back to the dissidents that I mentioned before. Those people who stood up to oppression or illegalities, or even in this country in the 50s, McCarthy tried to, the politicians separated us by the fear of communism, and and there's some talk now about separating the rich and the poor. That's what the politicians, that's their job to get elected. That's what it takes. But who is it? What does it take to stand up as as that spiritual being and stand in our nature? It didn't take audacity for Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, all these people, the Tiananmen Square people. It didn't take audacity or stubbornness or will. All of those are related to the human condition. Audacity, stubbornness, and will, that's in this physical world. When we go within our truth, audacity, stubbornness, and will simply become love expressing effortlessly. It's a different way of thinking when we're seeing the human condition versus when we're seeing our spiritual expression having just human experiences. They stood in their truth and created something akin, like I said before, akin to an opening. They came onto this planet, each one of them, and they were able to stand in such truth. Wherever they learned this, who knows, maybe they were born with it, maybe they learned it, but they were able to stand in their truth and cause a greater truth for all of humanity. That's a service. That's God expressing. Now, why again, Secretary Hillary Clinton visited Myanmar late last year or something, and there's a lady who's been the leader of the Democratic opposition in Myanmar, has been a military dictatorship, and they just converted to military-backed civilian government. And so Secretary Hillary Clinton went and saw this lady, and her name's kind of, I don't know how to say it, and she visited her at her home where she had been exiled for 2 decades. Now, what was it about her expression that they didn't just get rid of her? They didn't wipe her out. She was just exiled. What was it about her? What was it about that truth that protected her to be able to stand and witness her own government change form in her lifetime? And of course, the U.S. is reaching out to support them. Now, we're talking about dissidents. We don't all have to stand up to something big government, right? But we can look at that in smaller gradations in our own life. It doesn't always have to be us against Goliath. It can be just us standing in our truth in our life. Are there times in your life that you can remember when you knew the truth, and it wasn't, again, the right or wrong mind condition, but the truth of the soul, and you back down, right? We've all done it in some ways, little ways, big ways, but a bunch of those add up, and they separate us from our truth. So how do we get back to standing in that truth? And it reminds me of when I was auditing the Essential of Ernest Holmes class, the last class ago here. And in the book, there was a great example of our founder, Ernest Holmes, standing in the truth at a time when the racism problem was starting to creep up really strong in the U.S. There was an outpicturing of racism in a religious science situation, in a congregation. Once again, Ernest Holmes knew this. He didn't form a committee to be against that person and push him out. He didn't call him up and say, you can't do this. No pushing against whatsoever. What Ernest Holmes did was, he called up the Oakland church and said, can I speak this Sunday? And he went to the Oakland church. This brings tears. Wow, that's surprising. He went to the Oakland church and he spoke the truth. He spoke the truth, and that situation disappeared. He didn't have to push against it. He just found the truth and stood in it. Where in our lives can we do that? And so we're talking about those areas, and everybody read Jeannie's article in the newsletter this month. And it's a great place of Jeannie standing in the truth as she's traveling and having these great experiences. It's a really, really good example that she just had. So how can we change? How do we begin to know our truth and stand in our truth? Everybody's seen this sort of position from like a shaman chief or a Native American chief, that sort of thing. I have a picture of an Indian chief in the middle of my vision board doing this. What's happening? Show me the truth and let me bring it into this life. What is that to do? What is that like if you were to do that in your different arenas. I've seen a demonstration like this on TV, it may be on YouTube, where they have this martial arts person, and they have another man, two martial arts people standing there, and they're just standing up opposite each other, and one person just pushes the one gently on the shoulders, and the person has to kind of fall back, right? Then he guides him into a very brief, less than a minute, guided meditation to focus on the chi center, the power right here in the second chakra, and gets him to focus on that, and then to grow roots into the ground, and to see himself grounded with roots. Pushes, and he can't move the person. Now that's a shift from the human condition to the spiritual expression of who we are. So thankfully, we're designed with all of these different intelligence centers to be able to bring the truth onto this planet. We have our brain that has an intelligence center, and it adjusts our thought modes from this world of form to the inner world. We have our body-centered intelligence. You know, when we all went through puberty, did you have a manual beforehand? Right? Your body's intelligence knew what to do. It did it. You can access that for even greater answers. Then we have the soul's intelligence. That nugget of God that's within us that has an intelligence that has an intent for us to do good in life. So we're going to complete the talk with a little spiritual mind treatment. I want to leave you with what I can see here. What does it take for us to become the leader we've been seeking? Primarily, what is our truth in this situation? Stand in it and act from it. Simple, one point, that's the to-do. That's what we do.